I'm going to kick off the presentation. So a little bit about Chris and I, for those of you that don't know us, most of you do know us, but we've been marketers for a variety of companies. You name the size, from startups, which we work a lot in the startup community, but earlier in our career, Chris and I are involved with some of these companies on the right from their infancy, really when they were getting going, with the exception of Xerox. They were already a pretty good sized company when I was there, but the rest of these are full on startup from life. FedEx Office, that was the Kinko's play, for those of you who don't know, where we grew a small company called Kinko's into a nationwide company, changed it from analog to digital, and then sold it off to FedEx Office. That was a very good success story, and that was back quite a few years ago. But anyway, these are just a splashing of some of the companies that Chris and I and AJ have worked together to build this thing up. We're now teaching, most of you know, at San Diego State and at some other universities. We're guest lecturers, and Chris and I, in our retirement, whenever that may be, we kind of want to be instructors and professors while still working in the market and give relevancy to the new genre of youngsters coming out into marketing. And so we think that's a great thing for us to give back to the marketing community. At this time, I'd literally like to introduce you to AJ Crawford on our team, our marketing manager. We were happy to have AJ, and he is our subject matter expert. And AJ has been our tech, IT, and marketing specialist on this, and graduated to a manager and really runs this program really well.
Thanks, Randy. I'm really excited to be teaching you guys a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to dive into a lot of details about LinkedIn, everything you need to know in order to build a successful marketing campaign. So today we're going to first start off with the foundation, and this is actually the most important part of the presentation. Even if you've been in marketing for 5 to 10 years, you can never get too good at targeting and never too good at relevance. And if you don't have those two things, every tool in the world can't save you, and all you'll be doing is amplifying a bad message, which can really hurt your brand. So we're going to really get into that and talk about how you need to target and how relevance is specific to LinkedIn before we get into the messaging. Then we're going to get into why LinkedIn, why is it important, what are some of the metrics that make it a really good tool. We'll talk about messaging tips, how to elevate your messaging. We'll talk about some of the tools, automated versus manual outreach, and how you can kind of supercharge your LinkedIn funnel. And then we're going to talk about connecting your funnel, because lots of leads that no sales reps follow up on doesn't do anything for the bottom line. So that's one thing that we really stress is if it's not leading to revenue, all the metrics don't matter, So it doesn't matter if you get leads if you're not calling them and you don't have a good system in place. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Finally, we're going to get into some paid LinkedIn leads, and Chris is going to take over and walk you through some of the LinkedIn lead paid programs that you can also pursue. So secrets that appear to be working now, identifying ideal targets. So again, targeting, converting targets into qualified leads, and the key there, and we're really going to get into this, is relevant messaging. For those of you who've seen the million messages on LinkedIn about the new normal and people trying to do value signaling and all the different ways that they're trying to appear authentic, oftentimes in an inauthentic way, that really goes back to how relevance is extremely important, and not only being relevant in terms of your brand, but making sure when you're communicating with people that your message rings with them and it isn't just patting yourself on the back. We're also going to get into segmenting and prioritizing high value leads. So how can you use LinkedIn to really filter out those super high priority targets so you're not wasting time contacting the wrong people, and then showcase strategies, software, and helpful tools to help execute on that. One lesson I've taken away is if you don't have the strategy, the targeting, and the relevance at the top of the funnel, you're never going to get anywhere with more techniques and more tools. You're just going to waste money and waste time building stuff that doesn't work. So you need to really have that foundation before you get into the tools. So first, let's talk about targeting. The creepy Waldo ad, let's get into AAA targeting. So AAA stands for accurate, attainable, and adaptable. And it's something I always try to ask myself when I'm formulating targeting for a new company. Accuracy is really about not only your data accuracy, but the currency of it, right? If someone has moved on to a different position and you're marketing to a bunch of people that were a doctor 10 years ago, but currently aren't a doctor anymore, it doesn't really do you any good. So you have to ask yourself, how current is the data? Is it the right email address? Is it the right timing? Have they updated their profile? There's just a lot of questions you want to ask yourself. Attainable is really about message reading and message response rates. So one thing we've learned is even if you can get a hold of a decision maker on LinkedIn and get a message to them, doesn't mean they're going to respond, and doesn't mean you're going to end up in their calendar. So that doesn't really do anything for you. sometimes going through the executive assistant or someone, you know, in a different part of the company is a much better strategy for getting to the top, especially business to business, than going after the top target. So is your target someone who is going to respond, who's going to accept your request, who's going to help you schedule that appointment? And then adaptable, if your targeting isn't working, not only are you able to adapt, but what's your opportunity cost? Did you spend $10,000 on your targeting list and now you have this huge sunk cost in a data list that you realize is no longer working? Did you plan out early on, you know, small iterations? So if the 150 contacts or 300 that you tested didn't work, you can pivot without wasting much money. Keep that in mind and think about as you're designing your targeting, if I'm wrong, what is the pivot that I'm going to go to? How am I going to test this? We found typically it takes anywhere from 2 to 5 tries to get your targeting right. Unless you're a genius, odds are your first target is probably going to be very different from the one you end up settling on once you get your data and collect stuff on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Randy to talk a little more about this.
So really targeting is really important, and I know we really hamper on this in almost every webinar that we do. But what AJ is mentioning, and we discovered in LinkedIn, is it does take several attempts at the targeting, and you really want to niche your targeting down. So the more that we have found that you niche your targeting, which may delete your universe. And when we usually talk about targeting in startups, we talk about going very broad and then narrowing down as you go. And actually, for this type of targeting, especially if you're using Green Rope for your backend, for your CRM, you want to make sure that data that you're going to use for your customers, once you're actually talking to them and you've, you know, mentioned to them that you're got a conversation, and now you're going to take that customer who's opted in off of LinkedIn to you for a full conversation and agreed that you now can converse with them either through email or phone call. You can move that lead over to your Green Rope solution. And from that point, you can now put that into the rest of your automation that you have. But what I would mention there is to make sure that, and AJ mentioned this earlier, that this target niche that you have now, that you're not putting them into an automation off of LinkedIn that doesn't fit that particular person, that they're up to date. And so as AJ mentioned, we've noticed those things with a lot of campaigns that people have done on there. And so we just implore you, when you're looking at your Green Rope solution and what you've already got in there, if you're going to put this on the front end, that you make sure, one, we get an opt-in, because we want to make sure we're always opting everybody in, whether it's an email or a conversation. So we're really careful about that. And then you can port those over to your Green Rope solution. And then now you can create a customized pipeline for them and a journey for them in Green Rope that takes it seamlessly right from LinkedIn. So that's the main thing I wanted to point out about the targeting, and it's really key. And again, LinkedIn has some really great targeting, and there's some tricks and tools that we've learned over time using other things and knowledge that we have to make sure we're using the right LinkedIn targeting in there.
Yeah, and 2 more quick points from move on I want to add is one thing that we've been able to do a lot with Green Rope, and it's really effective, is your tool is only as good as its ability to connect to other tools. And what Green Rope is really good at is you can connect it to that LinkedIn campaign. When you do get someone who's opted in, you do get someone who gives you the email, you can plug it back into your Green Rope. You can use that to track. If you've tried to track in LinkedIn your messages and your follow-up, it's really difficult, right? So another thing about having a good tool, and this ties back to targeting, is how are you consolidating your data solution? What are you using to make sure you're following up with your targets? What are you using to segment your targets? And Green Rope has been indispensable in terms of segmenting, grouping your targets, knowing who you want to follow up, and setting up a good centralized data solution and strategy for all of those contacts as you convert them. Because oftentimes, if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, if you're managing your connections in those systems, it's really clunky, and you're going to have a lot of issues attributing and tracking your data. So it's really good to have a solution that kind of connects that to something like Green Rope that's going to help you make sure you're following up with everybody accurately. Let's move on to relevance. So the reason I like this is, for those of you who have a LinkedIn profile and have been active on LinkedIn, you've probably seen at least one of these people. And it's really common, right? There's your people who like to use buzzwords all over the place. The people who just, hey, do you have 15 minutes to talk, without telling you any reason why they want to talk to you, and your immediate thought is, what are you going to pitch me or sell you or sell me? You have the people who pretend like they have something in common that has nothing to do with who you are or your business. Running a team that's generic and can help them with anything is also not good. You want to be really specific. And again, if you don't write notes when you're inviting people, you're setting yourself up for failure, because LinkedIn punishes you if you send out too many invites to the wrong people. So not only are you not going to get the results you want, but if you're spraying and praying or you're sending out bad messaging, you're actually going to get penalized and punished for it, because LinkedIn really doesn't like people who are spamming people that aren't relevant to them. With that, let's go into some what to do tips that can help you out. So research, listen, and avoid. Those are three of the biggest things that I recommend. Research. Have you researched your target's interests, habits, pain points? Don't be afraid to go on Facebook and look them up, right? Don't be afraid to use tools in Greenrope or other tools to try and append your data, right? Don't be afraid to look at as many different ways as you can to find out what your audience is interested in, what sports they're into, what their pain points are. Like, really try to do some secondary research right out the gate, and then do some primary research. I can't tell you how many campaigns I've done where we had to do a major pivot because I honestly talked to a client and just called somebody and I'm like, hey, tell me about your experience. What do you hate about our website? Why did you not like that message? The phone a friend is actually one of my favorites. So if you know someone who's a LinkedIn influencer or has a big network and is in a similar target market as the people you're targeting, don't be afraid to call them and just ask them to vent about all the things they don't like or have received about messages, and you may be surprised by some of the insights that you glean. Google surveys or sending out surveys is another really good way to just collect that data. And then consolidating that data, again, being able to update that in something like Greenrope is really helpful as well, so you can store all that information. And then building a customer journey map is another way you can really map out and come up with a good idea of what your audience is thinking about as they're going through the sales process. Avoid cliche. So again, the new normal, throwing in terms like we understand in this trying time, things that everybody else is saying is something you really want to avoid, because it's just going to make you seem inauthentic. And don't jump on the bandwagon by messaging what everyone else says. We've learned that the best marketing is one that doesn't require creativity, because your customers tell you how to talk to them. So the better you can ask questions, the more effective that's going to be. Perfect. So why LinkedIn? So there's really three reasons why we recommend LinkedIn as a tool to help drive people into your pipeline and network and CRM. And the first is the target value. You can just find people that would be impossible to get a hold of in other methods on LinkedIn, right? We've got a hold of governors. We've got a hold of mayors of city council. We've got a hold of CEOs of companies worth over $3 billion, literally from a LinkedIn message. Typically, it's a LinkedIn message that we worked up the food chain. So we sent it to someone lower on the totem pole of the company. We got them to recommend us, and we worked our way up. But even so, in 2 weeks, we're able to get in touch with someone that might take 3 months to have a conversation with via traditional methods or cold calling or trying to hit them up on a different medium. So the target value is really, really good on LinkedIn if you have high value targets. So if you're trying to target investors, if you're trying to get funding, if you're targeting really high value leads, the higher the value, the more important LinkedIn is versus alternative tools. If you're trying to do quick sales, you're an e-commerce company and you're doing really quick turnaround, low value items, maybe LinkedIn isn't the best tool and you want to look at your Facebook or your Instagram type of channels. But for high value targets, LinkedIn is fantastic. Open rates is another huge, huge differentiator with LinkedIn. The number of people that will see your message on LinkedIn and just the response rates is far higher than, for example, email or just other types of messaging tools. Whether you're inviting people to an event like this one, we found that just sending out an email to our network versus sending people an invite, for some of you that received the LinkedIn invite, we see a far higher percentage of people that will see those invites and accept them. Finally, cost per acquisition. Especially when you're doing messaging, you're not paying for every message. We don't recommend using InMail here for this. So other than the tools you might spend and the human costs, you're not paying big marketing dollars. So it's one of those things where it takes time and effort and money to build it, to build your messaging, to build your campaign strategy. But once it's in place, we have strategies that ran for a year. And after that initial cost, they just had to pay the cost of the marketing tool. And the rest of the cost, they were already paying for a sales team anyway. So it was, virtually, no additional out-of-pocket marketing costs they were spending beyond the tool. So the cost per acquisition, like with one client, we saw over a 50% decrease. There's just huge savings in cost per acquisitions with LinkedIn. Once you get going, it's a little front heavy when you're paying to get the training up, but you typically will pay that with Facebook to train the AI or other tools. But in this case, you really see very good returns months 2, 3, 4, 5. So this chart I put in here to illustrate, this is current real data from one of our clients from this February, March, and April of this year. Over here, these are the appointments that we scheduled. So these are the messages we sent to people who accepted our invite. These are our responses. These are active conversations. So these are people, this is not people that moved to appointment. This is people that we're still talking to or working. So we have literally 600 people where we're pinging them every couple of weeks and slowly dripping them into more appointments beyond this. And just getting 70, 80, in this case, 31, this is from one LinkedIn profile. So keep in mind, if you have a team of 5 or 6 people, that could be this number of appointments per person. So how not to craft your message. This is just another really good reminder. Don't use new normal. Don't try to be fake in your authenticity. Again, I know everyone in this audience has probably seen at least 1 or 2 of these messages or heard about it where someone's trying to leverage the situation in order to sound magnanimous, and then they ask you for money or they tell you, let's talk about sales. Don't be that brand. Really focus on what is your value proposition, how can you benefit someone right now, and if you do want to show your human side or your authenticity, let that show through in your actions, right? Do something for your customers, like sponsor a contest or a campaign and then share it with people. Take an action that demonstrates your sincerity and then let people find out about it. Don't tell them that you're sincere, because people are just going to see that as fake, and that's going to push away more people than it attracts.
And so you want to use messages that talk about a prosperous future, because that's where we're all heading, instead of on the bandwagon of these old messages.
And I encourage any marketing you're doing, always keep up to date with the news too, because you want to make sure you're taking into mind the current news cycle. Right now, especially the bigger your brand and the bigger your audience, the more you have to be really careful. There's a trend where people are looking for companies they can tear down, right? Right now, people are frustrated, they're upset, they're angry. They're looking for someone who's not authentic that they can essentially make an example out of. And all you have to do is read the news cycles to see how many articles are coming out about this company that was inauthentic with their brand, this company that says, they care about one of the current movements that's going on. Meanwhile, they have poor hiring practices. So when you're crafting your messaging, now more than ever, not only is it important for that individual, like you might get a Randy who remembers it, the worst case scenario is you get someone who loves talking on social media, who takes that bad experience and tells everyone how terrible your brand is, and you wake up the next day to see 20,000 Twitter messages on people talking about how terrible your company is. Either avoid trying to talk about any type of value signaling, or make sure you're doing actions that signal it, and then just let those actions be discovered. That's the best way to showcase that you're doing something good. And make sure if you're doing something good and you're trying to talk about how you're pivoting, it has to be a pivot. So message tips, short, 300 characters or less is the maximum you can put into an invite. That doesn't mean you should use all those characters. We've actually seen a lot higher performance with 150 to 200. And even when you have to get every word of that value proposition in there, one lesson we've learned is shorter is always better. Take whatever message you think is the shortest possible version, cut it in half, split test it. I can bet you money that you will probably see better results from the one with half the amount of words in it, assuming that you still are managing to craft a message that's easy to read and understandable. Easy to read, Kincaid 6 is something that Randy stresses a lot, that I try to adhere by. That means keep it at a 6th grader level. If a 6th grader couldn't read it, don't use it. We just find in general that's a good practice. Persuasive. So persuasive really is going into the relevance. Is this relevant to them? Is this something they care about? And that's where I have the quote on the side. 100% of LinkedIn users respond to messages out of self-interest. They're responding to you because they care, whether they are angry and they want to take it, they want to flame you, whether they're responding because they like your pitch. They're responding out of some form of self-interest. So think about that. When you're crafting the message, they don't care about what you have to say. They care about what you have to say in terms of how it affects them. So really think about that. And then actionable. This is a really easy mistake that advanced marketers make all the time, and people new to marketing make. If you are trying to get a specific action from them, it needs to be as easy as possible. If I have to think about how to respond to your message, then you've already lost me. So what that means is if you're trying to get an appointment, even if you're trying to work them up to the appointment and you're starting a conversation, maybe ask them a question, but also say, hey, if you want to make a time to talk, here's a link, right? Give them the link right up front. Make it so that if I want to take an action that you're looking for, it's as easy as possible for me to take that. Having a very easy call to action is powerful. That doesn't mean, I'm going to pause here, that you immediately go for an appointment or try to push 3 steps down an action you want them to take. You still need to go through the sales cycle, but know what is the next step in the process that you're trying to get people to take, and make sure it's really easy for them to take that step and see that step. Okay, things to avoid. Again, the virtue signaling, and this is another example of that. You know, my Tumblr post about feeding the homeless got 10,000 reblogs. It's so satisfying to make a difference in people's lives as he completely ignores the people in the street. Don't have this guy be the perception people have of your company. Fake sympathy, feigned camaraderie. So the feigned camaraderie goes back to that, you know, acting like you're part of the same group that you're not. You know, trying to talk about shared connections that really aren't a lot in common, or just trying to create a sense of false connection with somebody. Just don't use the new normal. It's just don't. I can't tell you how many people. That's the number one thing that high-level influencers that I've talked to complain about, is that specific phrase. 99% of LinkedIn users ignore messages they don't like, and 1% will tell you why they hate your message. We've actually found this holds true. About 1% of the people that you send messages to will actually take the time to tell you exactly why they think your message is terrible. So if you're getting that, I mean, if it's more than 1%, maybe you should adjust your messaging, but you should expect there's going to be a certain number of people that just are looking for a reason to vent. But for the most part, if they don't like your messages, they won't respond to it. So making it likable, making it something that's interesting to them is just, again, the most critical thing. This stuff that we're teaching, it might sound like we're harping a lot on the same ideas over and over, but when I get into technical tools, that's easy. That's the 10 to 30% of your effort. 70% or more of your effort should be in the targeting and this messaging. That's why you do the customer journey and all the research, because if you get this part right, you could mess up a lot. You might have your attribution messed up. You might have some issues. You might have various problems. You'll still get some form of success. But if you get this wrong, no tool is going to save you. Keeping these messages in mind is the key to leveraging tools like Green Rope and really maximizing your revenues. Knowing that targeting, knowing how to talk to your audience, and then using these tools to make sure you set reminders for yourself and you're doing it consistency. So Green Rope, one of the best things about Green Rope is it allows you to take these ideas that you might have to think a lot about individually, and then use their automation tools to consistently implement it across the board, so that due to human error, you don't forget to send a message or forget to say something. So use those to automate or scale well thought out, very specific strategies, but don't use them to implement strategies that you're just throwing in a dartboard. And this is, again, how not to automate your outreach. I really like this one. So did you get my last email, my last 2 emails? Why aren't you responding? If you ever feel like your messages are, for lack of a better word, whining, you probably shouldn't be saying them. Because if you come across as needy, that's just a really bad brand message to be sending out. And this is something I've actually received similar messages to people. Also, guilt tripping people is a big no-no. You never want to tell the customer or your target that they are wrong, or try to guilt them into responding. That's a great way to just push them away, never hear from them again, or get a really angry message.
And so that kind of automated messaging, one is old, 2 doesn't fit, as we talked about before, and 3, if someone's still sending that out, that means that they're trying to do exactly what they did before all this started. And if you go back out to market exactly the way you did before, you're probably going to find your success rate is nowhere near what it was before. And not just because not as many people are back to work, it's because that stuff just doesn't work anymore.
Every one of these tips is a mistake that either I made or I saw someone make in the last 6 months, and most of these in the last 2 months. Really take these lessons to heart to help differentiate yourself from the crowd. Now that you have your messaging, now that you have your targets, let's talk about how you reach them, right? So there's the manual approach. If you want to get results on LinkedIn, you should be sending between 80 and 150 messages and new connections per day, consistently, at least 5 to 6 days a week. If you're sending out 10 or 15, you're putting up a post every other day, and you're wondering why you're not getting results, you're just not cranking out the numbers. And that's assuming that you have the right target and the right messaging. So for those of you that love sending out tons of messages and copying and pasting names over and over and over again, more power to you. I admire your hard work ethic. It's definitely doable without paying a cent to any tools or using anything else. But I don't like doing that. It's really nerve-wracking, especially as you try to scale. But at the same time, the second solution, automation, has its own issues. So if you try to automate things that you can automate, so there's tools, and it's pretty easy to find a lot of these tools out there. There's invitation tools, so you can come up with auto inviters. to invite people to events. There's so you can say automatic friend requests, where you can send friend requests on LinkedIn. You can have tools that will send follow-up messages to people. You can even have event invite automation, right? So we have tools for sending out automatic invites to events, which is really helpful, because if you've ever tried to invite 2,000 plus people in your LinkedIn network individually to an event, that leads to some very, very bad hand problems and potential carpal tunnel. Like, that's a lot of clicking, and I have done that. So we definitely recommend looking at some automation tools. That said, LinkedIn doesn't like a lot of these automation tools, and we'll talk about it in a bit. So you have to be careful. And typically, you always want to have someone with their hands on the wheel. So I like to make the analogy. Right now, automation on LinkedIn should be like autopilot with a Tesla car. Don't take your hands off the wheel, right? Make sure that you are there watching the situation, because if you take your hands off the wheel and you aren't paying attention, the bot might run you right into a truck. So that's why we talk about blended, which is where you have automation, but you then have someone in the cockpit who's watching that automation, who's monitoring it, who's checking it daily to make sure you don't get extra targets that you didn't want in your LinkedIn filters, right? Who's making sure you're not accidentally transposing the wrong information. And most importantly, here's the biggest thing I could teach you. As soon as someone responds to a message, you really can't automate that. You can't automate the sales process once someone starts talking to you. And that's where you need to have human involvement. And that's where you need to be tracking speed of response and what you're going to say when your customer starts talking to you. And that's where we lead to connecting the funnel. So this is the other area with LinkedIn where we've learned a lot. And this is where a lot of companies really aren't doing this well. I am actually friends with a lot of different agencies that are also in LinkedIn. And this is where knowing how to connect your LinkedIn to your Green Rope tool, knowing how to make sure the sales and marketing departments are synced together, is probably one of the biggest things right now you could do to immediately add revenue to your bottom line. You don't have to spend a single additional dollar in marketing to convert more of the people that are already in your database. So that means when you're attracting them, right, when you're sending them messages, do you have someone in place who's responding quickly to the message? Do you have a salesperson who has an open schedule? We've noticed that things like having 5 days a week that a sales rep is available to schedule calls versus 2 days a week can make a huge difference in your campaign. A lot of these things marketing agencies and marketers don't think about, because in their mind, as soon as they generate the appointment, their job is done. But that's really not going to work with LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is about the whole cycle. It's about generating conversations, and it's about building relationships. So you have to be thinking right out the gate as a marketer, how are you going to move that customer from I haven't heard of you to a successful conversation with the sales rep, right? And even beyond that, after that first call, what are you doing to follow up with them? One thing I love about Green Rope is it's amazing at making sure once someone enters the sales funnel, if you have a killer follow-up routine in Green Rope, it can really help you maximize that sales funnel. It can help you automate all sorts of things in order to send follow-up messages, to respond, to make sure your sales reps are getting all those appointments that they want to get. So make sure you define your different stages. You have handoff points. You're tracking those conversions. You're tracking how many appointments get missed, and understand where that automation stops and human intervention begins.
And I'm just going to drive up some points that AJ made, but this is really important. And one of the things we've discovered running a lot of these campaigns, as AJ mentioned, we've got a bunch running at the same time, is the handoff points. Probably one of all the things that he talked about, even including where automation stops and human intervention begins. And there's actually a couple people listening today that were, what's the best way to put this, that were non-contacts became contacts actually through this human and automation that we've actually done. So a few of you listening in can probably smile, because you were now connected to me, AJ, and Chris because of how we've done this. And that handoff point, which is really key. I remember talking about this to somebody here that's listening today, is when that handoff point came, they had no idea whether there was a handoff or not. It was so seamless that the handoff didn't seem like a handoff. To me, that's the best way to talk about this, is to make sure you do that. So when we talk about the respond, the schedule, the complete demo, and the sale, you want to talk about how long does it take you to respond to messages. The timing is so key. Not only does AJ monitor that, I've got my LinkedIn open on my phone and on my desktop. So no matter where I'm at, I never close it, that I can look at messages without getting notifications from LinkedIn and having go to LinkedIn. It's just open the app. That way, if anything hot is in there that you need to pay attention to, you can decide when that handoff is in the middle of the conversations that are going on. That's what makes it seamless. Whether it's you're getting a phone call scheduled or you're typing in on LinkedIn and starting to type the messages yourself and you want to end the automation part of it, that is really what the key is. So have a really good process for that. And again, the object of this is to get that lead, get the email, and even a phone number if you can, which we've been very successful at, and get these leads into your green rope as soon as possible so you can add them into a journey that you built there to continue the conversation if not ready for a phone call yet, but they've given you their email. If they're ready for a phone call, you can take them offline, ASAP. Someone that raises their hand and says, I'm ready to talk, anybody in sales knows that's the time you stop everything else you're doing. Forget the journey that you had in mind. The journey switches right to that phone call at that given moment. So don't make that mistake of not taking the time and realizing that's the time to pick up the phone, make a call. And sometimes that human intervention piece, you can nudge for the phone number at a certain time after you get the email and maybe get it to a phone call before you go into another automation in your green rope engine. So really think about that nurture nature we talk about and how those unconverted leads really can lead to new ones that you're trying to look after. And so we're showing you actually some of the best practices really on how to use LinkedIn, which is a human intervention machine, not really built for automation, and really making sure that you don't trip up and don't have LinkedIn give you what we call the hand slap where they turn you off for a little bit, or the smack in the face where they literally shut you down for a day. Same way that Google does to some accounts when you step into the point.
Just really quick, so how quickly you're moving your hot leads in your sales appointment. And another big thing I'm just going to add in here and move on. Are you using LinkedIn to nurture unconverted leads? Going back to those conversations that were in an earlier slide, make sure that everyone you don't get into an appointment, you're not dropping it. You're still inviting them to events and nurturing them and keeping up with them. And using a CRM to make sure you're tracking those people, like using Green Rope to set reminders and set a follow-up drip funnel for the people that don't convert quickly, really helps you maximize your dollars and get more sales, because it's way more affordable to convert leads that are already in your funnel than to get new leads. That's just a standard of marketing. Tracking, so make sure you're tracking. One thing I'll say is if you don't have any understanding about how API coding works, you might want to talk to someone when it comes to attribution, because LinkedIn is, like I said, it's very difficult to sometimes get that data, and really working with someone who can help connect your LinkedIn to your Green Rope is helpful. Exporting LinkedIn campaign data to CRM, there's various tools, but that's where we really recommend having an expert, because it's something oftentimes difficult to do. It's also depending on the CRM. One thing we love about Green Rope is they actually have really good API tools that we can use to talk to things like LinkedIn through some of the different connections that we've used. So there's some ways of doing that, and if you're looking for more, feel free to ask us. If you don't like manually entering hundreds of data points each month, a big part of your campaign will be considering how you're going to port your data out of LinkedIn. And then lastly, Randy touched on this. One thing we want to stress, and this is another reason why you might want to talk to an expert before going gun-ho, is you don't want to message more than 10% of your total contacts. And that's a rough rule, because anytime you're using automation, LinkedIn can potentially ban you, right? It's a very gray area. We're not doing any black hat marketing here. This is all stuff that you can do on LinkedIn. But again, you have to be careful, because if you're blasting too many people or you're going too fast, you have 200 contacts and you're sending out 500 connection requests, there's a chance you could get a soft or hard ban. What that means, a soft ban could be as simple as they kick you out and you have to log back in. Hard ban could be they tell you, they're blocking your profile for a while. So we really recommend consulting or talking to someone who really understands LinkedIn before you scale things up. And one point is paying for LinkedIn Navigator is a good option, because LinkedIn tends to be nicer with some of their invisible throttle rates if you're using Navigator. None of this is stated. They're never going to tell you how many people you can message, but we found that paying for Navigator is almost a prerequisite for doing a significant marketing campaign, because LinkedIn tends to be a lot nicer and give you more leeway when you're paying $80 a month, for their Navigator app. So that's one other option. Lastly, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to just finish up with LinkedIn leads, and that'll be it for the presentation.
Okay, thanks, AJ. So what AJ has been talking about has been, if you will, the organic side of LinkedIn. LinkedIn also has an advertising platform as well. That means just like Google or Facebook, you're paying for each contact that you're reaching. And I'm not talking about the LinkedIn in mail, but I'm actually talking about ads being distributed into the feed section of LinkedIn. Yeah, thank you, AJ. So I'm just going to give you a setup, and I'm going to actually show you what it looks like. So first of all, you're paying to target people, and you can target people that follow you, people that follow your company. You could target based on business size. You can target based off of whether they're a CEO or a marketing analyst or what industry they're in. You can even upload an entire list of your customers and target your customers in the LinkedIn feed. You can even upload a list of any list you have into the system and figure out and target people in the feed. But there's something that's specifically called LinkedIn leads. And what that is when somebody sees an ad in the feed in LinkedIn and they click sign up or learn more, a form pops up that's automatically filled in with the person's email address and name that's pulled in from LinkedIn. So the person doesn't need to type in any form. It's automatically filled in. There's an opt-in section that says, if you click next, you're opting in to receive information from this company. You click that button, and then we can automatically take that information from LinkedIn and populate Greenrope. Next slide, please. Okay, so remember I said, prospect sees the ad. When they click on the ad, they're gonna see the form pre-filled with all the information that you need, and then it's transferred over. I'm gonna share my screen. So what you're looking at, let me know if you can see, this is my LinkedIn screen. There's a little button here in the top right-hand corner, right next to a picture of me there. It says work. When you click on that, you'll see something called advertise. Click on that and you'll see the advertising portion of LinkedIn. You can then create an account or create an ad and click on LinkedIn ads. I'm not going to go through the whole process. I'm just letting you know. I already have a LinkedIn leads ad created. I have many of them that we've tested. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Here's an example of one. It says, learn how the top life insurance carriers and agencies enable their sales force to sell remotely. Insight makes it easy to sell online via virtual meetings. You see, and here's the ad. When you click on learn more, you'll see it pops up with a form. It automatically fills my email address and phone number that I have in my LinkedIn. The reason for that is because the majority or many individuals that are using LinkedIn are using it while on their mobile device. And it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to type in the information. No need to fill in the information. It automatically populates any other information. When I click submit, that information now goes to the advertiser. Now I have that information. It goes into Greenrope, and then Greenrope automatically sends the emails. I have generated a qualified lead. That is how LinkedIn leads works.
Just one shameless bribe. If you guys want to learn more about LinkedIn, you want us to get into the really nitty gritty technical details, build it out for you, whatever you're looking to do. If you're willing to do a quick conversation with us, talk to us about it. We will actually offer you a shameless bribe and send you a guide outlining all the best practices for supercharging a LinkedIn profile. We've consolidated a lot of the different best tips, how to make sure when people do visit your site, you have social proof, credibility boost, all of that stuff. We'll give it to you just as a gift in exchange for talking to us and letting us know kind of what you're doing with your business and what you're looking to do to grow.
And this is, again, a great way to get leads to opt in, because at that point, once they've opted in and raised their hand and given you their email and information, you could get them into your Greenrope system. And again, once they're in your Greenrope system, if you're having any trouble, building customer journeys, or you need help setting up automation in Greenrope or anywhere else, Greenrope has an awesome team, and they will help you get certified if you're not, help you implement any process, or even help you show you how customer journeys get built in their system. I mean, it's a great tool. And we love Greenrope. We love our association with them. As you can tell, we appreciate them allowing us to share knowledge with their customers and some of ours. And we just appreciate everybody being here.